Subaru. They're a funny old company, aren't they? I'd like you to take a quick guess right now as to how many cars you think Subaru sold in 2023 in the United Kingdom. And to help you in your quest, I will let you into a little secret. It was a bumper year for them. After the malaise of 2022, sales for 23 were up by 73%. But how many cars do you think they registered last year? Pause this video, hop into the comments, have your guess, and I'll see you in a second. You're back? Right, I shall give you the answer. It is 2,409. Yep, that's it. Meanwhile, in the United States, they shifted 57,000 in December. They sold over 600,000 cars in a year in the USA. In fact, whether it is true today or not, I'm not sure. At certain points in the past, Subaru have sold more cars stateside than Mercedes and VW combined. There is just something about the company that means they just don't work here, but they really do over there. And it's cars maybe like this that you'd say certainly work more for an American audience than a British one, the SVX of the early 90s. Their attempt at a rival to the likes of the BMW 8 Series and the Honda Prelude. A car built really for your grandpa. But as you might have guessed already, this is no ordinary Subaru SVX, if there is such a thing. Instead, it is a Subaru of a very different nature. And I'm looking forward to getting to know it a little better. So then, what exactly is it that we have here today? It is a car that was known by a few different names depending on where in the world you were. In America, they called it simply the SVX, but at home it was the Alcyone SVX. I did look at the name first and think it was called the Cyclone, but alas no, it's Alcyone, named for the brightest star in the Pleiades star cluster, which is the one that gave Subaru its logo. It is the successor to the vaguely similar looking XT, also known itself as the Alcyone, or in New Zealand and Australia as the Vortex. And it's a pretty bold car for the company to have built because it is somewhat unlike any other Subaru out there. First off, it is a two-door but still four-seater coupe, meaning it is inherently not quite as practical as other models in the lineup. It still has a fairly good sized boot, though in the rear you have legroom but not headroom. I myself can fit in there, but only hunched, and I would get a little bit grumpety after about 5 or 10 minutes. But that's fine, that puts it vaguely in line with many other large coupes of the same time. And there is a good chance that this car was built with a fair dose of ambition, because it was released just as Japan's economy was reaching its peak. Unfortunately, it was launched just as it all fell apart, with Japan experiencing a crisis that took them a decade and a half to even begin to recover from. The SVX was in production from around 1991 until about 1995, never selling in quite the same numbers as its predecessor, which itself had been introduced in 1985. And two clues that this car was designed not simply for the wealthy Japanese customer that had all but vanished by the time it came out, but maybe more for the export market as opposed to the domestic one, are the fact that both the engine and the car itself are larger than many other Japanese vehicles. Over there, they have regulations for both the size of the engine and the vehicle itself. And the general gist, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is that if your car fits into one of these brackets, the most famous of which being the K car, there will be many benefits for you, including in terms of taxation and where you can park the thing. But this was offered simply with a 3.3 litre engine, not the more tax-friendly, slightly sub-2 litre turbo as you got in its predecessor and many other Subarus, and the overall dimensions too also put it into the largest class of car. It still, by modern standards, isn't actually all that big, though again, in keeping with 1990s coupes, there's a lot of bonnet and a fair amount of boot, and the interior still feels a touch cramped. Perhaps needlessly so, because in this particular example, the adjustment for the wheel is broken, so I can have it either up and loose, or down and locked in place. In the interests of safety, I am keeping it down and locked in place, and doing my best not to saw my own legs off. I have to say I was actually a little bit surprised to find out that Subaru did indeed sell these in Britain, though I suspect not in any great quantity. Today there are 2 of them up for sale on Auto Trader, both at around £4,500. This one is a Japanese import, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if most of the others in Britain today are also, simply because in the 1990s it made a lot more sense to import cars from Japan rather than buying them locally, thanks to a very favourable exchange rate on account of that economic collapse. As the years went by, the general consensus then seemed to be that cars which had lived in Japan most of their lives would be in relatively better condition than those that had been here, chiefly on account of the fact that the Japanese allegedly don't salt their roads, though I have been told that actually is not true at all. They can, do and will. And if you live in Japan, perhaps you can clarify that for me. Do they or do they not? Regardless, I think the general idea is that people in Japan do care for their cars a lot better than we do here. And I have to say, though clearly this car is very modified, there's still plenty about it that tells you it's something that Subaru spent a lot of time and effort on. First off, we have an electrically adjustable driver's seat. The passenger can do their own. You've also got air conditioning, which I'm happy to say still works. Power steering, electric windows, all round. And let's talk about those for a second, shall we? I'd love to have been in the meeting where somebody said, right, our new car, I got an idea for that. You know how we all love windows, right? Why don't we put a window in a window? Only in Japanese. And I could only gather that at the back of the room, the director of the company must have gone, because it's Japan and they all smoke indoors, and he'd have gone, you know what? That's cracking. I like that idea. Anyone got any more? And somebody else would have piped up and gone, actually, boss, I've got a fabulous idea too. You know that corner of the car where we put metal and we've put steel there and we've tried aluminium and everything else? Yeah, go on. He said, well, I've been thinking about it. Cardboard's out, but what about glass? What, so we can see through it? No, let's just put more glass on the outside. It's kind of cool, it's kind of weird, gives you this wraparound look. The A-pillar sort of vanishes on the exterior of the car, and then you've got this window in a window thing here. I mean, I suppose it's there so you can have a lot of glass going forwards and then still give you a window rather than a big chunky A-pillar and all that, but it's a bit weird, isn't it? I do, though, love it. You've also got electric wing mirrors, cruise control, and even very early steering wheel mounted buttons to control the stereo, which sadly no longer work because it's now been replaced with a European compatible one. But they're quite cute. I like stuff like that. And while this stuff, which I'm pretty certain is vinyl, reminds me of just about every single Japanese car ever made from 1985 to 1999, this suede is a bit of a surprise appearance, and there's plenty of it in the back too. And that's standard, I'm told. I love the shapes of it as well. You got this whole wraparound looking thing, and is that might be wood, or at least wood effect. That's the handle, by the way. Not bad, Subaru. Not bad. Certain Japanese market variants of these even came with four-wheel steer, though I'm pretty sure not this one. Oh, and how did I forget to mention this handbrake? Pretty epic. Feels like it should be the throttle. That'd be cool. And I wouldn't put it past the Japanese either. And then there's the engine. You see, you mention Subaru to anybody, and I guarantee the moment you do, they can hear in their head that noise which heralds the imminent arrival of a moron. The classic sound of a Subaru flat 4 boxer engine. And though here we have a flat boxer engine, what we have is not turboed and not 4-cylinder. Instead, it is a 3.3 litre flat 6. And you might think that'll make it sound a bit like a Porsche, but it doesn't. Instead, I think this gives me more 2J vibes. Rather sexy sound, this. The exhaust, unsurprisingly, is not standard. It is a stainless steel item, which apparently is basically straight through. No silencers, resonators, or anything else. But from outside, it doesn't actually sound anywhere near as wild as you would expect it to. It is a lovely noise, though. And let's discuss the mods, shall we? Because I'm sure you've noticed already, this SVX is not standard. It was, though, when current owner Richard acquired it in 2005. He's had it 19 years, and for him, it is a keeper. It had at that point already been in the car for a couple of years, having just the one owner in Great Britain, who apparently passed away. Richard acquired it, and then not long after, he went on an Autocar Track Experience Day, where, for the princely sum of £99, he was able to experience a number of Hondas. So he took out an S2000, an NSX, and a Civic. And he really liked that. Not just the Hondas, but the track bit. And so he decided to turn this into something of a track car. And over the next decade and a half, he took it on upwards of 30 different track days. And as he went along, making improvements as required to make sure the car would be just about dependable. So the engine still makes standard power, which is 230 odd horses and 230-ish pounds-feet of torque. That's around 309 Newton meters. This being a Subaru, it also came from the factory with standard fit all-wheel drive. Later in its life, they did try a front-wheel drive version for the American market, but I'm told that never sold really all that well. By default, they came with an all-wheel drive system known as ACT4 for Active Torque Control. You can also have it with VTD, Variable Torque Distribution. And I asked Richard which one this had, and he said he didn't know. So I'm going to assume it is the regular ACT4. The difference being the VTD has a planetary center differential, which can be a little smarter in how it sends the power about. In any case, these are all set to be, by default, more rear biased. Something, again, I think, that was aimed to appeal to the American market. Of course, this being a Japanese import, the indicators are on the right. Turning circle, that's actually really good. Oh, I'm surprised. Let's let this pink Fiat 500 go past, and then we'll get back onto the road. Yeah, good car this. And visibility is amazing. You don't feel quite as low slung as you do in a Honda Prelude, but it's pretty awesome. But these seats are pretty epic. The gauges are very much classic 1990s, and I do appreciate the attempt at making it a little more upmarket. You might have twigged the fact that this car has a whole separate rev counter over here. Well, that's because one of the biggest issues with having an SVX is that apparently nobody wants to work on the things. They take one look at it, or even hear that's what you've got, and they say thanks, but no thanks. Imprezas, not a problem. Legacies, fine. But an SVX, no, they won't do it. And unfortunately, over the years that Richard has had the car, he has taken it a few places that haven't really cared for it as best they should. And long story short, after one such event, it was decided to fit the car with an aftermarket ECU, a mega squirt item, and for that reason, it now has the separate rev counter. And I think the only issue with having something like that is it does give you the impression that you're in a sort of drag special, and that the car should have a lot more go in it than it actually does. And just in case you were sat there thinking, crikey, this looks like an extra from the Fast and the Furious films, at one point, Richard did actually run nitrous in it. Yeah, he doesn't anymore though, and I think that's wise. This is now his second engine, and unfortunately one of the issues he's facing is that they've apparently become quite popular for people to drop into other cars. Perhaps a little bit like the Cosmo's 3-rotor engine that now appears in a whole variety of other things. This 3.3, I'm told, with the right supporting mods, can take an awful lot of power. And as it happens, Richard makes absolutely no claims whatsoever that this car is making a single horsepower more than when it left the factory. And if that is true, we're talking here about a 230 horsepower car that doesn't have masses of torque and yet still weighs around 1,600 kilos. It is, I think, pretty fair to say that this was never ever going to be an obvious choice for a track car. But in a lot of ways, that's what makes me love it even more. On the front end, certain pieces of trim and the grille and that have been removed to give the car better airflow. At the back, I'm sure you've noticed the addition of the rear wing, which probably does something, but does look quite tuner aftermarket. And this is the sort of car that, at a quick glance, I would expect to belong to a teenager. But it doesn't. Richard is a professional driver by trade, and so though he does have some spare money, he doesn't have unlimited funds, and it was important to him that whenever he did something to this car, it was chiefly in the name of reliability and not performance. If that came as an added bonus, great. And under that heading you would count things like the now larger 17-inch alloys in place of the regular 16s, the uprated 6-pot floating calipers at the front. But the most dramatic change of all may be to the gearbox, because from the factory the SVX was available only with a 4-speed automatic. This now has a 5-speed manual in it, a hybrid box that's effectively pinched from a P1 and then adapted to suit. You need to make a custom prop shaft and fit it, and the whole job cost about £2,500. That was done back in 2011 when he finally blew up the 4-speed gearbox. And believe it or not, up until that point, he had been tracking with it quite happily and rather enjoying just how many people looked at his car and went, oh dear, that's the wrong thing to be taking on track. Almost as inappropriate as that gorgeous Brooklands that's just gone past. I must say that though I like the idea, I'm not so much in love with the execution of this gearbox. First, second, third, fourth, they're fine, but when it comes to getting it into fifth, it doesn't feel right. You push the thing up from fourth and over, but then when you go to put it in fifth, it feels like it's going back into third. Very disconcerting now. To rev match is quite easy. The engine spins up quite freely. Heel and toe, not so easy. Let me try it in fourth to third. Yeah, I can just about do it. I've got big feet and big shoes today. And Richard himself described it as a momentum car as opposed to an acceleration one, and he's right. But when you have picked up that momentum, it's actually quite a cheerful thing to drive this. Now, in spite of the red line on both the aftermarket gauge and the main one being somewhere just shy of 7,000 RPM, the car does seem to hit a wall at 6. And I have to admit that I am deriving an awful lot of pleasure from the fact that this is a car very, very clearly never designed for the purpose that Richard is now using it for. It is somewhat retired from track duty, but he's still determined to keep it looking as it does. Today it's more a high days and holidays car. As soon as he started turning it into more of a track car, he bought himself another Subaru as a daily. And when he gave me the list of modifications, my first thought was, oh dear, this thing's going to be utterly and totally ruined. The moment I saw the word coilovers, I thought, great, that's going to be hideous, horrid, bone-shaking ride. It'll be scraping over every lump and bump in the ground. But actually, that's not true at all. I'd call this, even as a road car today, reasonably soft. And he tells me that it's much firmer than it was before. The turn-in, very classic Subaru, is not especially keen. And the steering, while I would love to say that it's obviously light to cater for the elderly driver that Subaru expected to buy these sorts of things, don't think it's actually all that different to my Impreza was. The brakes work quite well, and to be honest, my biggest concern is that when you put your foot down, that front end dips quite a bit, and over some of these bumpier sections, slightly concerned I might actually tap it. Let's see what it's like when you throw it around a bend with a bit of gusto. It digs in quite nicely, actually. You can really feel that rearward power bias. Put your foot down. There's no traction control or anything like that, but to be honest, it really doesn't need it. And it can pull its way out of a bend really well. It doesn't feel corrupted by the all-wheel drive system. And as a road car, this thing's actually really good. Oh, it's that fifth gear though. Oh, every single time I think I'm about to money shift the car. Do not like that at all. Right, here's the thing. I know that if you're into your Subarus and your SVXs specifically, you're going to be looking at this and you're going to be thinking, James, why couldn't you find a standard one to review? Well, that's not the way that I work. I don't go looking specifically for cars most of the time. I was just offered this, and at the time I wasn't quite aware of how modified it was. I'm really glad though that I have driven it, because it's nowhere near as ruined as I thought it was going to be. And though he might have built it as a track car, what I think Richard has here is a really quite nice road car. At road legal speeds, 40 to 60 mile an hour, you can have an absolute whale of a time. It feels really well set up for a British B road, which, considering it was a car conceived in Japan and likely built for the Americans, that's quite the achievement. If you've got a standard one, I'd love to try it. But for now, I think I'm going to put the Subaru SVX on my list of, you know what? They're not just cool and rare, they're also pretty good. And with that bombshell, it's time to end. So thank you once again to Richard for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.